This is the 2013 VGC World Championships. Arash Ommati from Italy faces off against Ryosuke Kosuge from Japan. Arash is about to win the entire tournament. There's only one problem. He shouldn't be here. And no, not because he cheated or anything. I know you read the title before clicking on this video. He wasn't disqualified due to any sort of misconduct, but rather he should have been eliminated before even entering the World Championship. That is, if not for a single, very fortunate rule change which changed the timeline of competitive Pokemon. And we will explore that today. There's getting lucky in the classic Pokemon sense, and then there's what we're going over today. We'll examine the incredibly fortunate incident that effectively gave Arash a second life in allowing him to qualify for Worlds, as well as his journey to make the most of that second life in coming up with his signature Mamoswine and taking it to a Worlds victory so iconic, TPCI itself actually went on to distribute that Mamoswine as an event Pokemon, shiny and all. So we must ask, how did we get here? As impressive as Arash's victory was, the fact that it happened at all in the first place is somewhat miraculous. It came about not entirely, but at least at first because of luck that was as major as it was unusual, in that it goes far beyond the usual bounds of critical hits and other in-battle RNG. And we're not talking your average, everyday kind of luck. This is advanced luck. Forget things like rock slide flinching or missing. Heck, you can even forget that other form of luck, which goes beyond the battle itself, and that's also often overlooked, which is that of the bracket maker's pairing generating the opponents you'll face and the order you'll face them in. Sometimes you'll get a relatively breezy run before you face the tougher opponents in the later stages, and sometimes you'll be fighting through a real gauntlet from round 1. While of course these elements were factors as ever for Arash as every other Pokemon in every other tournament ever, this luck went beyond the game of Pokemon, even beyond the tournament itself. But before we get into what happens in the story though, we have to learn who the person in the story is. So our first question, who is Arash? Where did he come from? Well, that can be answered in his own words as I interviewed him for this video.
I've always been a huge Pokemon, video games and strategy fan, and I had been playing singles very casually from time to time until 2012, back when I found out about in-person official events, and it just made so much sense for me to enter them, you know. I am the first world champion from Europe and the only one for 8-9 years ever since. I've also made finals of major tournaments multiple times, and I have countless top cuts. I still play occasionally, but I was mostly active until 2018-19, yeah. In 2013, my life was basically thinking about Pokemon at school, then returning home to play Pokemon until I went to sleep and then repeat. I literally fell asleep thinking about Pokemon every day. I would imagine board states in my mind and solve them. It was kind of how I fell asleep at night.
This is a kind of dedication which might sound insane to someone who's never gone through it, and completely relatable and reasonable to anyone who has, as in addition to wanting to win, there's a fascination with and enjoyment of the game that makes the whole thing effortless. Many competitive Pokemon players have gone through something like this when they first gotten into the game and want to explore the nearly endless possibilities within it. And in Arash's case, this early enthusiasm led to him becoming the first player to win in the Masters division in his first year of competing. Of course, such youthful passion and excitement comes with its own downsides, mostly the practical restrictions. Many of us will be familiar with mom telling us we have to go to bed instead of playing video games all night. But Arash actually experienced a different youth-related form of bad luck. He was doing very well in the 2013 season, but being in his last year of high school at the time, he was unable to attend UK Nationals and was unable to grab points from it, and not being able to grab points from it posed a threat to his goal of even reaching Worlds. Now, before we move on to the incident, it's important for us to understand how the point system works. Basically, every time you enter an official event, depending on how you do, you get a certain amount of champion points. Your name is then put on a leaderboard, and depending on where you are on that leaderboard, you may qualify for Worlds. However, Arash was only able to attend 2 out of the 3 European Nationals, acquiring enough points to get on the top 24 leaderboard. However, this is its own form of bad luck, as he was competing for a slot in the top 16, and when UK Nationals was finished, he came in at, yes, 17th, thus disqualifying him from Worlds. Devastating, right? Well, here's where the all-time luck appears, and in his favor. Originally, you'd have to be top 16 on the European Champions Points leaderboard, but for some reason, this was later changed to top 32, meaning that Arash went from being disqualified at top 17 to now qualifying. Why did this happen? Well, we honestly have nothing concrete to directly point to the cause, but our anonymous sources speculate that it had something to do with the 2013 UK Nationals event itself, because apparently it ran late. like really late, with people remembering it didn't wrap up until at least 10:30 p.m. And again, this reason for the rule change is ultimately speculation, but it was this change that allowed Arash to qualify. Fortunately for him, he didn't spend time stressing over his 17th placement, as the announcement of expanding qualifiers to 24 places was made quite early, so he was relieved to discover that he had in fact qualified for Worlds. According to Arash, some American players complained that Europe got more invites, while others in Europe were upset as well. But as in most instances of luck in competitive Pokemon, even including the extraordinary circumstances of this one, it's not enough to just get the luck. You have to also be good enough to win with it. Getting this second life wasn't a guarantee of a win at all, and Arash did not fluke his way to the championship. In fact, he used this opportunity to bring something completely new to the game. That brings us to our next question. Just how did the iconic Scarf Mamoswine come into being? After graduation, Arash started looking for inspiration for something anti-metagame that he could use to his advantage at Worlds, and he noticed a Mamoswine being used in a match at Korean Nationals. It wasn't a Scarf Mamoswine. After all, Mamoswine is so identified with its priority Ice Shard, using Scarf in it seems completely antithetical to its primary purpose, and even Arash didn't start out with a Scarf on it, but seeing Mamoswine used made him realize that it had an incredibly valuable place in the metagame of the time. The format-defining genies had incredibly high usage, and Mamoswine's vicious Ice Stab absolutely tooled them. There are nearly no other Pokemon so capable of reliably KOing every single variant of Landorus Therian, while also resoundingly dominating Thundurus Incarnate as well. Eventually, Arash landed on not just a Scarf Mamoswine, but a bulky Scarf Mamoswine, able to withstand even powerful hits like Scarf Landorus Therian's superpower, and despite the lower power, the added hit taken was consistently valuable. Scarf speed enabling faster Icicle Crashes and Icicle Spears, rather than the weaker priority of Ice Shard that wouldn't threaten its targets nearly as much, went beyond just making Mamoswine itself more threatening, but enabled its partners in unique, irreplaceable ways as well, by being able to outrun and, even with less attack investment, destroy most Thundurus. Timid max speed variants of which had become increasingly popular in the Japanese metagame, and whose greater usage at Worlds thus Arash anticipated. Mamoswine would be the perfect partner for Flying Gem Acrobatics Tornadus Incarnate, which would be immensely dangerous to everything that wasn't Thundurus. Additionally, going with Scarf allowed Mamoswine to run Rock Slide in the 4th slot, one-hit killing most Volcarona variants, and pairing with Icicle Crash to give 2 moves that could pick up a flinch, which, even if you're not explicitly relying on, can be incredibly valuable bonus, and aren't exactly low percentage emergency plans in a worst-case scenario. The best players know luck isn't something you just let happen to you, but something you create opportunities to obtain yourself. In this vein, Arash's Mamoswine being able to run Icicle Spear in addition to Icicle Crash meant it had a 100% accurate option for when it didn't want to risk the latter's 90%, and more concretely, was able, with its multi-hit nature, to bust through Focus Sashes on Garchomp and Landorus Therian. But that's just Mamoswine. What about the rest of the team? Well, at the 2 national events he was able to attend, Arash had already happened upon several powerful strategies that he would continue to hone for the biggest stage. There, he used a team of Garchomp, Cresselia, Tyranitar, Gyarados, Bisharp, and Amoonguss, and it allowed him deep runs in both tournaments. The only change he made between them was changing the recovery of Amoonguss's Black Sludge for Lumberry in order to wake up from opposing sleep, as Gen 5 sleep both reset upon switching out, meaning it was almost a surefire KO in a format as fast-paced as VGC, and grass types were still valuable to Spore and Sleep Powder at the time, making both Amoonguss and Breloom incredibly dangerous. Many watching Arash's finals games years later would comment on just how powerful Amoonguss was in the format, and indeed, he would find himself enjoying Lumberry against opposing Breloom at Worlds too. In addition to zeroing in on the power of Amoonguss, Arash also was certain he wanted a defiant user on the team. In his own words,
yeah, another thing I realized I loved using after the qualifiers were over was Defiant. Like, I used Bisharp at Nationals, and I was looking into Tornadoes for Worlds. I just felt like with Landorus T being the main threat of the format, and Hitmontop also being pretty high, like Defiant was like a bit underrated for how good it was. I also think like there was a reason for it, because like Bisharp was like not a very strong Pokemon, and Tornadoes also had like major weaknesses such as Thundurus again. So I feel like, yeah, that's like where Mamoswine comes into play. With Thundurus out of the way, Tornadoes was just free to hit everything super hard with Flying Gem Acrobatics. In turn, Thundurus, like Tornadoes, would just get rid of threats to Mamoswine such as Hitmontop and Conkeldurr. And so the pair was just super strong. Although Mamoswine was like not like a very strong mon on its own, I feel like the meta game was like just perfect for it. Also because I remember like by the time of Worlds, players had basically started like using like a Thundurus that had like slightly less bulk, meaning Mystical Crash would always find the KO. So I think it was like the perfect time to play Mamoswine.
Arash's Mamoswine is also iconic for being shiny, and this wasn't entirely an aesthetic decision. In Gen 5, there was actually a strategic advantage to using shinies, because a shiny would take up 2 entire seconds upon being sent into battle. So if you found yourself looking to play out the in-battle timer, you would actually want to run a full shiny team. Not wanting to leave out any possible avenue to victory, Arash originally aimed for this, but quickly gave up after realizing this wasn't something he was realistically going to be playing for, and so it didn't justify the tedious, time-consuming process of getting shinies. In Arash's words,
you had a reason to run a full shiny team, or alternatively, you could get the same by using Pokemons that had the Pokestar Studios Star, which was a mechanic that you would have in like 5th gen. And like I was trying really hard to get get that on my Mamoswine, because I thought shiny Mamoswine was really ugly. But then like I gave up because it was like really time consuming. And then like I thought basically, I just borrowed a shiny Mamoswine from friends, and I was like, if it goes poorly, like if I go poorly, I'll be remembered for using ugly mustard Mamoswine. And if it goes well, it will be like first place golden Mamoswine. So it was a win-win scenario.
In addition to Tornadus, Amoonguss, and his handcrafted Mamoswine set, Arash rounded his team out with Sunny Day Latios to assist Amoonguss in taking on rain teams. Heat ran for general offensive defensive utility while taking advantage of Latios' sun, and Conkeldurr for its powerful anti-sand presence. With this, Arash headed to Worlds. Remember the part about gauntlet luck? Well, Arash's first opponent was Lee Provost, one of the best players from the UK with recent high-placing finishes, and Lee also wound up packing a Mamoswine. It was a sign of things to come. Arash fought his way through one tight 2-1 set against top opponents after another. In round 4, he made his top cut placement likely by reaching a 4-0 record despite a tough matchup against Benjamin Rothman, only to take a loss in round 5 and suddenly risk not making it in should he lose again. But he managed to take another victory against Christoph Kugler, and day 2 was confirmed. In Arash's words,
I knew it was my first Worlds in my first year competing, so being there was already something I was really proud of, you know? And especially back then, when way fewer invites were given out, it felt like a huge accomplishment to just make it to day 2 of Worlds. To qualify for Worlds, you needed like to have one or multiple like very deep runs, because they were giving out way fewer invites. And so really most people there were like really established players.
Arash continued his way through the top cut, making it to the semifinals against Ben Gold, who was using a team similar to Sagen Park's Trick Room setup with Jellicent and a Lightning Rod partner, though Ben's Lightning Rod user was Rhydon instead of Marowak, and he was packing an Abomasnow. And here's where some more traditional Pokemon dramatics flared up, a classic case of devastating in bad luck. In the deciding 3rd game of the series, Arash was advantaged with his Conkeldurr poised to take out Ben's Rhydon when Ben's Abomasnow used Blizzard and scored a crit freeze against Conkeldurr. This would be horrible at any stage, but in World Semifinals, to make matters worse, the Rhydon that was just on the verge of being taken out was now able to place itself safely behind a substitute, essentially becoming far more threatening for free. On a dime, and literally because Blizzard freeze rate is 10%, the game had been swung from Arash being likely to win to him being likely to lose. He needed to defrost on the next turn, or that be that, and the defrost rate was a mere 20%. Fortunately, Conkeldurr does indeed thaw out, breaking Rhydon's substitute with Mach Punch, while Arash's Tornadus uses U-turn to take out the low health Abomasnow and bring in none other than Mamoswine. Rhydon rock slides and doesn't do much damage. Ben sends in Volcarona, and here's where Mamoswine's Scarf rock slide pays off big time, taking it out and helping finish the game. Just the ending of this game is exhausting to recall, and the finals are still to go. Imagine having to play the entire tournament with moments like this around every corner. Now we go to the finals, taking a quick moment to remember the UK Nationals delay that allowed this to happen in the first place. Here's where Mamoswine starts to become a star, and where Arash's ingenious team design show itself to the fullest, playing out exactly as planned. In Game 1 against Ryosuke, Arash leads Mamoswine and Tornadus into Conkeldurr and Thundurus. Ryosuke has 2 priority moves going for him. Thundurus paralyzes Tornadus with Prankster Thunderwave, and Conkeldurr hits Mamoswine with a Life Orb boosted Mach Punch. But Mamoswine survives and takes Thundurus out with Icicle Crash, and Tornadus avoids a full paralysis and takes Conkeldurr out with Flying Gem boosted Acrobatics. Double KO on the first turn. turn. Now, this was already an impressive showing from Mamoswine, but while it does get some more hits off before going down afterwards, the rest of the battle is Arash making his way through Ryosuke's Cresselia and Heatran impressively with a Mungus Conkeldurr and a paralyzed Tornadus of all things, with Tornadus having to utilize the opponent's Trick Room for itself. Not exactly an easy matchup even after the turn 1 double KO. In fact, it was quite a bad spot, and Arash himself said he was helped out by Ryosuke's first turn protect with Heatran, thinking perhaps the Mamoswine wasn't Scarf, or perhaps just playing overly safe. Where Mamoswine really becomes a star though, and really earns that TPCI distribution, is in Game 2. Arash leads with Mamoswine and Tornadus again. Technically Tornadus and Mamoswine, their placement now switched, but in effect the same, and this time they face off into Heatran and Cresselia. On the first turn, Scarf Mamoswine earthquakes, and the Heatran, this time not protecting, goes down before Trick Room can go up. After Ryosuke replaces Heatran with Conkeldurr, Arash switches Mamoswine out. Once again, Tornadus winds up KOing Conk, with its Defiant helping in that Ryosuke's Landorus Therian in the back wasn't able to come in and intimidate it. And when Lando T did come in, Tornadus U-turned on the Cresselia, stinging it quite hard with the +1 attack boost, and Mamoswine came back in. Mamoswine winds up taking Landorus out with Icicle Spear, then teams up with the Mungus to take out Cresselia. Now that's a star. A few months later, the Pokemon Company International would indeed distribute Arash's shiny Scarf Mamoswine, further cementing it as one of VGC's most iconic Pokemon. And to think, he wasn't even supposed to be there. Thank goodness for that delay at the UK Nationals. And thank you so much to our Platinum patrons. Thank you to Alex Sable, Anthony Belval Renault, Daniel Isbeast, Corman, Don Creek, Eric Dissing, Espion Lover, Funky, Glitcherton, How, Jack G, King Yabber, Nightfall, Megamon VGC, Mojo Game Slayer, Nurse Jake, One Penguin to Rule, Pretzel SP, Palamute, Plutonian Shores, Schmooter, Seagulls Incorporated, Sojiro Sakura, Spavoon, Skylaria, Soars and Croxon, Shiwei Miji, Stoneface Colin, Tyler, Kiboflu, Wardeen, Zachary Stimson, Zathor, for their major support of our videos.